Hi, my name's Ash.
And I'm Callie.
And welcome to Paved with Gold, the eating disorder recovery podcast. I would like to acknowledge the traditional landowners on which Callie and I are recording and extend the same respect to the traditional custodians of the lands from which you are all listening. For this episode, we wanted to do something which has been a long time coming. So if you were to think about the stereotypical image of an eating disorder, it would probably be a very thin, emaciated, young cis woman. And obviously this podcast is dedicated to refuting this idea that eating disorders have one look, because all that does is cause more harm and it makes it harder for people to access help and have their illnesses be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Eating disorders affect people of all genders, and today we are going to share the lived experience of an eating disorder from the male perspective. So according to the National Eating Disorder Collaboration, an estimated 1/3 of people reported to experience eating disorder behaviours in the community are male. However, due to underdiagnosis, misdiagnosis, and the stigma associated with eating disorders as a whole, this number is presumed to be a lot higher. And the NEDC also states that men are grossly underrepresented in eating disorder research, and the research that does include males is also almost exclusively with cisgender males, and may not even be inclusive of people who identify as trans or gender diverse, but more on that on a later episode. So there's a lot of work to be done in this space.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Which is why it is so powerful when men do come forward and share their lived experience to show that they are not alone when it comes to this illness. So with all of that being said, we have an amazing guest today, and we are joined by someone who has a lived experience with an eating disorder, and he also happens to be a fellow champion at the Inside Out Institute with me. It is with absolute great pleasure to welcome a friend of mine, Liam. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
Oh,
yay! This is the part where we aggressively compliment you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be I'm going to have to get my tennis racket and start hitting them back. So I don't know how to take the compliments.
Don't worry, none of us do. It's all a learning process together.
It's all awkward and,
Yeah, we're so stoked. So as we always do on this podcast, can you please tell us where your story with an eating disorder started? Where did this journey begin for you?
Yeah, good question. The longer that time passes, I think, and the more hindsight that I get, I see it as starting at different times. But at the moment, in this part of my life, because I guess when you've got a new lens to view your past within, after you learn more about yourself and your past and things, you start to see the patterns earlier and earlier. But I grew up in Dubbo, New South Wales, so it's a town, I guess, but it's not a small town by any means. But I started sort of demonstrating eating disorder behaviours, I think, from around 10 years old, something like that. I had absolutely no language or understanding around what an eating disorder was, so I didn't see anything wrong, I guess, but I just knew from around about the age of 10 that I started, purposely skipping meals and looking to try and reduce my weight. I was very weight orientated, which was really interesting. And I think that was just from influence of those around me at the time. I had some experiences where people in my close proximity had issues with weight. And by issues, I mean not necessarily that they're overweight or anything, but they were very fixated with weight. So I just sort of absorbed those behaviors and became very fixated myself. And, some external stimuli and prodding to drop kilos was around me all the time.
Can I ask a quick question? Not to interrupt you so early on.
No, right.
Were these people, were they also male, or was it female sort of influences that were expressing this kind of?
It was female.
Okay.
Female influences around me. So, coming home from school, I was put on scales and weighed and told to cut down, and that I was too heavy for my age and things like that. And when you're that age, you don't know how to deal with that or how to internalize that. You just know that somebody that you respect and you want affection from is telling you that you're not good enough. But here's this one really tangible thing that you can do in order to become good enough. Is just drop a few kilos, right? So the bullying,
that's just the answer to it all, right?
Exactly. So you get the bullying at school about it, and then you get the bullying when you go home. There was just no escape. So I was like, oh no, this isn't something where it was just affecting me at school and there was a couple of dicks at school. It was like, no, it's at home. So it was constantly reinforced behavior of, no, you need to lose weight. You're not good the way you are. You need to start cutting down, which was interesting, like, especially the young boys, you tend to have a bit of baby weight when you're young, just before you shoot up. So
yeah, everyone does, really.
Yeah.
yeah, and when I look back on, like, it's very difficult to actually look back on my old photos because I feel a lot of shame about it around that age. Like, I find it really difficult, which is really cruel because it was just, I can acknowledge logically that it was just a sweet young boy who just wanted to be loved and be included and be accepted by those around him. But just all the feelings of what I was experiencing in that time has sort of shaded that. So from an emotional perspective, I can't look back on it with a lot of joy and a lot of happiness. It's more, oh, that person wasn't deserving of love. And then that just carries in throughout your life, right?
Absolutely. And as a 10-year-old, like, I think if I, the purpose of having photos, I think of it, in the context of me as a mum, and I take photos of my daughter, and I'd love for one day for her to look back at these photos and have all these really happy memories.
Yeah.
To have to look back at, photos of you at 10 years old when you should be a kid, you should be playing, you should be just, being a 10-year-old. And that's the feelings that come up. Oh my goodness. I'm literally covered in goosebumps.
Yeah.
The mum in me is like almost crying.
Yeah, it sucked. And I've recently remembered some experiences when I used to sit down. I used to be so upset with myself because I felt so unlovable and so unloved that I would just get these hot flushes of emotion that I couldn't deal with internally. So I used to just sit there, and there was a photo board that I had where it had all my young photos, and I used to sit there and just scratch them with pins because I just was like wanting to externalize the anger that I had for myself. And so I was just like pushing it onto photos of myself, and to sort of unpeel that's really, really difficult because that's how I was feeling at that age, and that sort of carried on and was masked in a range of different behaviors, I guess. But that was the internal dialogue that I had from a really young age. And to unpick that, more of my life has been that than acceptance. So it was, yeah.
And like emotional regulation, right? Like there's so many key points throughout childhood that you you need to be teaching your child how to regulate themselves. And you've essentially been taught that the way to regulate your emotions is to lose weight or harm yourself, essentially.
Yeah. And my parents didn't know that stuff was going on. That was the really difficult part because mum and dad would know how to deal with it. They're really emotionally mature adults and they've got experience with child and adolescence, mental health and things. But I hid it so well because there was so much shame associated with it.
Yeah, of course.
So it was just like people around me and I didn't know how to bring it up. I didn't know how to talk about it. I felt like if I did bring it up, they would reinforce it. And I was like, if they reinforce it, like I wouldn't be able to handle that.
There's nowhere else to go, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I just chose to sort of ignore it so that when I was at home, I was sort of blocked away from all of that. But even then, it started leaching in,
Yeah, you can almost handle it if it's coming from yourself, but when it comes from other people, then you're almost confirmation you're proven right. And it's, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like my life would have panned out very differently if it weren't, especially for my dad, who's always been a very stable, wonderful figure that always provided that unconditional love. But if I didn't have that, I think I would have been in a very different place because bullying within the family was really bad, from extended family and things like that. So I just,
oh my God.
Yeah, it sucked.
I have goosebumps.
Sucked.
Yeah, I want to reach through and give you a big hug.
Yeah. Don't know if you're a hugger, but like.
I know I'm a hugger. That's
great.
generally my I much prefer a hug over a handshake. That's for sure.
Handshakes are so awkward.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And like, can I just ask then, like from there, so like you've mentioned, already, like, when you look back on those photos, you can't, it gets really hurtful to look back on those photos. But then how has that manifested throughout, the rest of your life, with your eating disorder, with, navigating that as an adolescent? And then I'm not sure when, you were able to get through all of that, but do you want to give us a little bit of a...
Yeah, I think the way it manifested for me would be not too dissimilar from just about anybody who is affected by an eating disorder, right? In a lot of ways, particularly the one that I had, anorexia nervosa or bulimia tendencies, is around overachievement. So I found that academic achievement and attaining this physical ideal were the ways in which I could cope because I got a lot of external validation when I did those two things. So if I did really well in tests, then, the people who would ordinarily bully me were like, oh, well done, that's amazing, really proud of you, you should be really proud. So they really valued achievements and success over emotional well-being. So I was like, okay, this is clear stimulus. People now are respecting me because I'm doing well. Like, I'd never really thought of myself as a smart kid or anything like that. But when I went to school, I did well in a couple of tests when I got to high school, and then suddenly got flushed with all of these people being like, wow, that's amazing. Because when I went from year 6 to year 7, you had to do sort of an entry exam. And I didn't do too well on it, actually. So I got put into the middle stream, I guess. And then when I was in year 7, things just sort of clicked. I got a bit more of a work ethic and things. And then, I scored really, really well. And then suddenly I was projected up into the top stream of the accelerator programs and things for academics. And so when people at school and teachers and family were all just like overwhelmed with how well I'm doing, and they wanted to positively reinforce that, right? Understandably so. But the internal messages that I got from me was, okay, I wasn't good enough before. Now that I've achieved this, academic success, I've got to hold that as tightly as possible to ensure that I, don't get cast out from the group. And it was the same with weight. I just started losing weight, and then I became the skinny kid, right? So, and I loved that. I loved the fact that I was always thin. But it got to a pretty bad point. Like I said, I hit it well. From an outward perspective, you would just probably think that I'm a smaller than average size kid, maybe hitting puberty late. I didn't hit puberty till quite late because I was starving myself so much. But when I was in year 9, I weighed less than when I was in year 5. So I just had this drive to maintain a really small weight, and I couldn't bear breaching, what I defined as the overweight limit, which was completely arbitrary, right? But I'd weigh myself multiple times a day. I'd be doing sit-ups and push-ups, whatever I could to maintain, and that's how I would parcel out my food for the day. I would stand on the scales and I'd see what I weigh, and then that would dictate what I could eat for that day.
I guess that's kind of going hand in hand with the academic achievement stuff, right? Because, that's how you were, that was such a focus for you. And then with that, potentially, that was assisting in succeeding in academics, and like they're kind of going hand in hand. So of course that was so important to you, because then you were receiving love, and it's like, wow, okay, if I stop doing this, I'm not going to get love and care.
Yeah.
That's such a common narrative, isn't it?
Yeah, associating validation with results.
Yeah, I think, Ash, you can definitely speak to that, right?
Oh, yeah, that definitely rings true for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fairly common theme, I think, with people suffering from eating disorders.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a truck driving past. I hope that's not feeding.
It's all good. Nothing. We're used to,
I have a toddler sometimes laughing and screaming in the background, so it's fine.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting is that some of my friend groups actually started picking up that there was something wrong, but they didn't know that it was an issue, I guess. And so nobody had language, especially in Dubbo, of language around eating disorders. Eating disorders was this ethereal concept that only affected rich white women, was the stereotype, right? So and it wasn't something that was actually a mental illness. It was a quote unquote play for attention, I guess.
Or choice, or like you're doing it. Yeah, like you could just eat, like.
Exactly. It wasn't a condition. Like, you're clearly just doing that for attention, blah, blah, blah. So they actually coined the term manorexic, which was really interesting, because the concept of having a male with an eating disorder was so foreign to them that they had to coin a new term, which was manorexic. And that's what people would call me, because they saw that I was so fixated on image and body and eating well and eating clean and exercising.
How does that land for you? Like, how does, someone calling you manorexic, like, how does that kind of, like, did that bring any feelings for you? Like, I'll go back to my original question. How does that land for you?
I don't know, really. I haven't really come to terms with it. It's interesting. I view it more from like from a fascination angle of going, wow, it was such a foreign concept. The idea of an eating disorder affecting somebody in my immediate, in my immediate environment, particularly a man, that people couldn't even associate the word with that.
Yeah,
so
that's kind of what came up. Like, it's anorexia. Like, it's not any different. Like, you can't, like, you wouldn't put a different definition underneath manorexia. It'd be the exact same thing as you'd write under anorexia. So it's just like kind of like, like a subtype. I'm just kind of like, why are we separating this? It's kind of like bigorexia. That's,
Yeah, new term that's sort of coming up, but it's always existed.
And it's like kind of, well, that's kind of orthorexia, isn't it? Like it's not,
Exactly.
why are we, yeah.
We're just changing
interesting.
new words because they can't associate it with males. It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And my family have definitely got tendencies of eating disorder behaviours on a broad spectrum, from restriction to overcompensation with exercise and things to binge eating disorders and things like that. So
where do you think that came from for them? Do you reckon it's, where we're kind of all victims of diet culture and, where the errors that we grew up in, or do you reckon that it was something else?
I think it was error. I think it was the errors growing up in. Like some of my family grew up in some really tough times, and didn't have, the lives I think that they wanted to be able to have for themselves. And so, I guess, viewing it, and this is definitely just shooting from the hip here, but viewing it from my perspective, I reckon it was just a feeling of, they couldn't control their lives, so they couldn't control this one thing. And so back in those days as well, you didn't talk about your feelings, you didn't talk about your internal dialogue. So it just fed through with actions, right? You just became reactive to stimulus in your environment. And one of the reactions for them was to, be very conscious about their weight and to project that onto those around them. And I think that just carried through the generations. And so it affected, mainly the women in my family. I don't know if any men in my family that I can really, if I really look back and look through the family, I don't think any of them have ever really displayed behaviours of eating disorders, but definitely the women. The tendencies that I have with the women in my family is that I'm very similar emotionally in the terms of that. I feel things quite strongly. I'm quite an empathetic person, and I pick up on energy and things in the room. And so I think that I just had very similar tendencies to them, which, the environment and the genetic factors were just perfect for the creation of an eating disorder, basically.
You mentioned that you grew up in Dubbo, and for those who are unfamiliar, Dubbo is like you said, it's not a small town, but it's a regional city. It's about 350 k's inland from Sydney in New South Wales, or like a 5-hour drive. But can you talk a little bit about what it was like accessing care in a regional town and your experience with the health system and community care there? Which, I mean, we already know for people who almost fit the every definition of an eating disorder in a sort of stereotypical way, they can, regional care can often be really challenging. Did you experience that? And then what extra things were on top of that, given that you were a male with an eating disorder? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I just touch on sort of how I got to that point as well.
Oh, please.
Where I sort of, I just sort of existed maintaining my weight for a really long time. And then when my friends started hitting puberty around that 15, 16-year-old, everybody became really obsessed with like getting muscles as men, like getting, jacked. And so I started getting these other messages where it's like, oh, no longer thin, start bulking up, putting on weight. So I started to pursue that lifestyle, thinking, okay, I got to start living really healthy and hit the gym and eating a lot more and stuff. And I did that for a while and I actually put on quite a bit of weight, and I was quite healthy. I was very athletic at that time. I was playing a lot of sport. And then when I jumped on the scales one afternoon, it was such a trigger point for me because I hadn't weighed myself in such a long time. And I saw that I was significantly heavier than what I used to be. And even though I was far healthier, far fitter, far more effective at school and things, I could think clearly and I was operating quite well, something just snapped in me. And I went, whoa, started to freak out. And I was like, I need to change this immediately. And so within, 3 to 6 months, I just shredded a significant percentage of my weight really, really quickly, which is ultimately what got picked up, because people started seeing me fainting at school and I couldn't keep my feet, and I was starting to, like I was sleeping a lot as well, like in the afternoons and things. And then people started seeing me waking up early and exercising quite crazily and then skipping meals and things. So that's when it got picked up, not until it got really, really bad. But I'm 7-8 years down the track from this. So this is a well-worn path for me. It's just now my body's not able to keep up. So then when it got picked up by those around me, I still was in complete denial. I had no idea what was wrong with me. I just knew that my body was falling apart. And we tried to access services, right? So trying to see a psychologist, which was so difficult. It was so difficult. It was so difficult to find somebody that I could click with. There was such a small pool to be able to choose from. And at that point, I needed really serious intervention. It wasn't, I could go see a psychologist once a fortnight or once a month or something. I needed I needed supervision basically at that
Can
point.
I ask? Sorry, I want you to continue down that point, but can I ask like the initial kind of diagnosis part of that? How did you go about that in a country town back then? Because, there's not really, I don't know if there is in Dubbo, it certainly wasn't in Gundawindi, like psychiatrists that were obviously able to diagnose you with anorexia nervosa. Was that like down a GP pathline, or how did you kind of navigate that?
It was with a psychologist at first. So I finally did find a psychologist that I gelled with. But the problem with health in Dubbo is that it's frequently fly in, fly out, basically. People come in for a short period of time and disappear.
Of course.
So I couldn't maintain a stable GP. I couldn't maintain a stable psychologist that I could develop a rapport with. And the psychiatrists that we had available, right, were there on very short rotations because the support there was so poor. So often you would only get a few minutes with a psychiatrist, and then you'd come back a few months later, and then there would be a different one, and then you come back and there'll be a different one, and a different one, and a different one. Right?
That's
so it
tough.
became
because you think of GPs as well, right? Because they go to these country towns because they're incentivized. Is that the word?
Yeah,
incentivized to go to these country towns because we're calling out for them, but they only have to be there for a certain amount of time, and they get that money for it, and then they get to leave, and that's why they do it. It's because they're guaranteed a job and they're guaranteed good money, and then I've served my time, now I get to get out.
Yeah. And I want to preface it here. I'm definitely not shitting on the health sector because,
no, God, no, yeah.
They're just doing the best, I guess, with what they've got available to themselves. Like I remember I did an interview recently with one of the newspapers, and I was shocked with what they reported because I prefaced it with that. I was like, look, there wasn't enough resources for them, but they turned this piece into me just slamming
God, okay.
public health sector. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm a huge supporter.
Yeah.
Like, this was my experience. And if they had better funding and better resources and better programs, it would be very different. That's what I was advocating for, more resources, but just slamming it just makes people want to lose faith in them.
And like you think about it as well. Like I think about me, and you couldn't pay me enough money to go out to a country town and practice there. Like you wouldn't, like I just wouldn't do it because it would just be, not where I want to be. And so like, it's not like you can blame them for having these sort of thought processes as well. Like, of course, I'm a new graduate. I get a lot of money if I go do this, and then I can leave and, set up my life. Can't blame them for that. But unfortunately, it does have impacts on small towns.
Yeah,
it does. And so, I couldn't maintain a stable network of support there, which is what I found really, really difficult. And when, as you know, like when I got the diagnosis, I guess, from the psychologist, not soon after, she went on to further study education. So I didn't have that support anymore. So I was left with this diagnosis, but no real support around me either.
Yeah.
And I found like it hit me. Yeah, I had this really weird experience when I was like, what do you think's wrong with me? And she was like, oh, it's clearly anorexia nervosa. And just hearing the words, I couldn't accept it because I was like, that doesn't affect men. Like it's completely wrong what you said. But also at the same time, I was like, at least there's something. So it's something around anorexia. At least there's something that I can point to. But my experience when I got stuck with that label was really awful. So when disclosure is really difficult, especially when you're coming to terms with an illness, particularly one that you can't see fitting with your identity. And so you have a bit of a crisis there. And to disclose that to people was really anxiety provoking. I had a lot of fear around doing that, but I remember I was too unwell to go to school, right? And I remember disclosing that to one of the deputy principals at the time. And it was just the most horrendous experience because I was sitting there with my mum and we're like, Liam is too unwell. He needs to come out of school. We need to get some serious treatment to make sure that he's okay. And the deputy principal was just sitting across from us and was like, what, you're not like strong enough to get through, like, and you're just you're just an ill, like a real ill little boy or something. Like it was really
How
offensive.
old were you then?
I would have been 16, 17.
Oh my God.
And I just remember my mum's a really strong woman, right? And I just looked next to me and she's crying. And like, I'm starting to get really upset because this woman is just like tearing us apart and basically saying that, this is all in my head, which I guess to some extent.
What do you mean it's a mental illness?
Push through it. Yeah, I should just push through, and that why do I deserve special treatment and things like that. And it was just horrendous. Luckily, the principal came in afterwards when we complained about it because it was, I didn't want to tell anybody anything anymore, right? Because that was my experience of like, hey, this is what I've been told. And then just that pushback was exactly what I was expecting in my head, right? People just to be like, that's ridiculous. Like, what do you mean you've got an eating disorder? Like, that's insane. She was just saying, well, you can just go and get something to eat. Like, it's that easy.
I
So I
wonder,
was like,
I'd be interested if she had the same reaction to like a teenage girl sitting in her office, you know, saying this to her.
No idea. I don't think so.
I don't, and you can only speculate, right? But I especially back then, it was still very much like, yeah, boys do not get eating disorders.
Yeah, but then the principal came in. When he heard about it, he was a massive supporter, which was really interesting. So
Great.
he came in and he was like, this is completely unacceptable. Like, what you're dealing with is real, and like was really validating, was really opposite, right? But I remember after that experience, I had to then go to one of the adolescent mental health wellbeing units in Dubbo. And there was no psychiatrist there. So I had to see somebody who, had like a Cert 4 in community services or something, and sit down and had to go through like a questionnaire, and handled completely incorrectly, right? Like saying the wrong thing. It was a textbook of how you shouldn't talk to somebody with an eating disorder, right? Like the opening line was, oh, so you have an eating disorder. I thought that only hit women. Like, that's interesting. And then just like took a note, and then he was like, I could use one of those myself. Lose a few pounds. And I was like, this is just a shit experience.
I swear to God, everybody that has ever had an eating disorder would have like a story of somebody saying something like that to them. Like,
yeah.
And now I could use a little bit of that myself, or
I wish I had that discipline.
Oh, right.
Yeah, right. It's so insane.
It's like part of my French, but also not, but go fuck yourself.
Honestly, like that's the only appropriate answer.
Yeah. So that again made me just, when I left that first sort of experience of telling what I thought was a healthcare professional, when I left, I was just like, I'm never talking to anybody ever again. I'm never seeking help. I'm going to now go and die from this illness because I don't want to be judged again. And so it was really difficult for my parents to watch that because they felt completely helpless, and they had to really coach me to go and reach out for help. And then those were my experiences when I reached out for help, right? It just reaffirmed all of the negativity that I thought was going to come my way if I disclosed. And, unfortunately, that was exactly how it panned out.
I mean, well done for continuing to reach out for help, but like, fucking hell. Anyway, sorry, go Ash.
I have just based on what, like, it's interesting, and I don't know if you if you've thought about it this way, but I'm sure you probably have because it's your own story. But it's interesting hearing you at the start telling us about how you had this shame about your body, and then you almost went through this extremely sort of self-punishing process only to then get shamed again. It's kind of that shame has kind of been underlying like this whole time.
Right? Yeah, because you were getting that validation and confirmation of being loved and cared for initially, right? But then now you're going back to the whole reason why you did that in the first place.
Yeah, and it was really weird too because the family and people and friends around me who originally told me I needed to lose weight and look better and blah, 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 they'll come to me and be like, oh, you look really unhealthy and you need to get better and you need to eat more. And I just remember being so angry, right? Not knowing how to deal with it. Generally, like growing up in that sort of environment, stereotypically.
And you're a 16-year-old boy at this time too.
Yeah, exactly. Fear, anxiety, and stress is all manifested and comes out outwardly as anger. So I was just angry, and I just remember being like, fuck you. I'm doing exactly what you wanted me to do, and I'm doing it really fucking well. So, like that, I remember just feeling rage about that. And even now, it still feels palpable. I was just so angry.
Understandably.
That they had the audacity to come back and just say, I'm not good enough now. And I'm like, I went to the nth degree for you. I did as everything that I possibly could until the point where my body was falling apart for you. That's what it felt like, right? That's what it felt like. And so I didn't seek support after that. I remember thinking, okay, fine, I'll do it on my own because mum and dad were getting really worried. And, what I now know as schemers, I had these schemers about, I wanted to be able to get the approval and love of those around me. And I couldn't handle if they were upset with me or angry with me because I felt like they were going to leave, because that's how it manifested, I guess. I had this sort of abandonment schema and fear of upsetting those around me. And so I would have to do whatever I could to make them happy. But a lot of the time you do the opposite when you had that feeling of those around you didn't accept you, you'd just get really, really angry and just want to push back. But it was also killing me on the inside to see how upset and worried they were.
Just in terms of your parents, because I kind of want to like hug you, and now I want to hug your parents as well. But just in terms of your parents, because I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I've interpreted this wrong, but they're not like, they're kind of rapidly learning along this process as well. Is that correct for me to say? Would they did they have any idea what was going on? Like, they're trying to best support you and advocate for you, and like still, but not really knowing like how to do that, or like I'm just imagining like that process for them as well. Like, must have just been like, what do we do?
It was a steep learning curve for them. And look, shock twist to the story. My mum's a social worker and my dad's a psychologist. So like they had insights, right? But Dad said to me years later down the track, he's like, I always gave myself permission to not be your therapist, right? So Incredible. I never hold anything. And he was perfect throughout the experience, right? He didn't understand what eating disorders, like he didn't have a background in eating disorders at the time. He's later retrained. He's become really, really good at it.
Amazing.
But,
yeah.
My parents, they didn't know, and like it's not their fault. They weren't educated about it. There was no resources out there. There was literally $0 funding into eating disorders research, right? So how were you supposed to know? It was really, really difficult for them. And when you get an eating disorder, it's not an eating disorder affects the individual; it affects the entire family unit, right? So it's really difficult.
It's interesting you say, your dad, he did a really good job of not, wanting to not be your therapist, because he's not. That's actually something that I say a lot to my carers that I work with, is that you're not their therapist, you're not their dietitian, you're not their support worker, you're not a professional, you're their loved one. And so your main role in all of this is to love for them, care for them, and, support them when they need it. You don't need to be all of those other things, because hopefully, some people don't, but hopefully they have people in those roles already. So I think that's incredibly insightful and powerful of your dad, especially back then.
Yeah, it would have been really difficult, because I know how much he loves me, right? And it was so difficult to watch him go through it. And I remember there was this one point, because I didn't want to get help. Like I just felt like this broken individual that nobody could accept. And I remember him just getting really teary and really angry. And he's like, "You're going to die. Like, you are going to die." And it was over a fight to make me drink, a protein shake. Just crazy, But the feeling that I had when I was forced to eat was going, "You're not good enough if you drink that. You're not good enough. You're not good enough if you put on weight. You're not good enough." So it felt like this really rock and a hard fucking place to be between, I'm upsetting them now, and it feels like they're not accepting me now, as they shouldn't, because I was very, very unwell. But if I drink this, I'm also going to experience them not being happy with me and loving with me, right? So it was like
a tug of war.
Nothing I could do. Yeah, and it was so difficult to deal with. I didn't have the emotional intelligence at all to be able to handle that situation. So again, I would just get really angry, right? And I would just push. I didn't know what to do, so I just tried to get away from it and run away from it. And
kind of perceive them to be the enemy. Like, why are you doing this to me?
It was like, you're hurting me. When they were giving me food, it was like, you are attacking me, you're abusing me. That's what it felt like, because it was like, I want to be loved, and you're giving me something that's going to make me unlovable. Like, that's what it felt like, right? And so, but it got to the point where the discomfort of seeing them so upset outweighed the discomfort that I had of putting on weight.
Wow.
And so I decided, okay, I need to do something about this. So I decided to go see a dietitian. And so I was like, okay, I can do this myself. I can will myself through it. If I can wake up at 3 a.m. and go for a 10K run when I've got no food in me or no energy, like, surely I can do this, right? So ignorant of it, because I couldn't. But anyway, I went and saw the dietitian, and she took my vitals straight away. Before we even started, she was just like, "You need to go to the hospital right now." It was that serious, right? So mum and dad are sitting next to me, and mum was shocked. She's like, "I had no idea that you were this unwell," because outwardly, like, I just looked really lean and muscular. But very thin, but, I still looked healthy. There was people with eating disorders that probably looked, this is the difficult thing with it, especially with anorexia. Like, you don't have to be emaciated to be really, really unwell.
Yeah. It's almost like it's a mental illness, with sometimes it has physical ramifications.
Yeah, exactly. So ridiculous, right? Foreign concept. And then I went to the hospital, and they were just like umming and ahhing about whether they admit me. Thankfully, they didn't admit me, because they didn't have the resources there. But we were able to, I'm so fortunate in this circumstance that my family had private health insurance, and we're like, okay, because at the time there was very few resources. Like, now there's a lot more, but very, very few, especially publicly available. And so we got admitted into a clinic, a private health clinic for eating disorders. And I had to go there, and that was really difficult, right? Because I had to go to Sydney. I'm away from my family. I'm away from my friends. I'm now on this unit, and I'm one of 22 other people. And guess what? They're all women. So again, I'm sitting there and I'm going, somebody's made a mistake. I do not have an eating disorder. I don't know what it is, but it's not an eating disorder. I do not need to be here.
I don't fit in here.
Yeah, but then when they did the ECG when I was admitted, right, even when they were telling me, they were like, you are dangerously underweight right now. And I was like, well, if I'm anxious, my heart rate stays up, because I was really worried about my heart. My heart rate was like into the 30s. And so they were saying, I was like, well, if I'm anxious, my heart rate's high. And they're like, you need to stay anxious.
Yeah. Can you please be as anxious as you can? Yeah.
Yeah, she was like, I'm really concerned that your heart will stop.
Did they
and
keep
even
you
then,
there then? Like, I'm surprised they won't like ship you off to public straight away.
Yeah, I don't know. I stayed there. I was under supervision and things. So, but they, even then, right, I still had so much denial about an eating disorder, because I'm like, there's nobody that looks like me, that sounds like me, that is like me at this facility, right? And so it wasn't until probably my second week in the facility that I was sitting at this group therapy session, and because I was just convinced it was OCD and depression, right? And they're the tendencies. That's the difficulty with an eating disorder, especially with one like anorexia. When you starve the brain, it tends to manifest into the hellish three, which is, you've got the eating disorder where you're emaciated, but you also get OCD, obsessive compulsive tendencies, and depression along with it.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with sort of three fronts at once, which is completely overwhelming at the time. But I remember sitting there in that group therapy session, and we were just talking. One girl there just went, "This is what it feels like for me." And she just explained her OCD tendencies and her fears around food and safe foods and dangerous foods and what her experience was like. And it was just this light bulb moment. I was like, holy fuck, like that's exactly what it feels like for me. And then I was like, I remember going around to each individual. I was like, do you feel like this? Like, do you have these weird obsessive compulsive thoughts about X, Y, Z? And is this what you feel like when you're eating food? Is these are the experiences and feelings that you're having when you're eating food? And they're like, yeah, me too. And that was a moment for me where I was like, shit, like, one, wow, yes, we've found it. And then immediately overwhelmed by the feeling of, I'm the only man in the entire world that has this right now. I am fundamentally, as a human, broken and don't deserve to be here. So it was like crazy experience and a wave of emotions going through it. And further compounded by the fact, even though I was on an eating disorder unit, right, there were some maniacs in there that were responsible for our care, right? Like the person who was leading the unit at the time said to me, because I was like, I just want to get out. I want to feel human again. I just want to go outside, because I wasn't allowed outside, right? I wasn't allowed to move anywhere. Like I had to stay in this unit, and I felt dehumanized. I didn't feel like a person. I just wanted to see my family. I wanted 30 minutes outside just to experience the sunlight, basically. And I was losing weight still, because when you start eating again, a lot of the time, especially at the start of the refeeding process, your body's still losing weight as your metabolism's kicking in, because it's like, oh my God, we've finally got some nutrition. And I remember sitting, with one of the people reviewing my profile, because if you'd hit a certain weight, you're allowed to go outside, like it was this real, like, understandable, but a really strange process where they would chart your progress. And if you were gaining weight, you'd get different privileges, which was really interesting.
Because it's your fault if you don't.
Exactly. And this person's sitting across from me, and I'm like, I need to go. And she's like, well, your chart says you're losing weight. And I'm like, you can see me. I'm eating everything. I'm on 15-minute rotations. People are looking at me every 15 minutes to make sure I'm okay, and I'm not doing anything to hurt myself, blah, blah, blah. There's no way that I could be losing weight. And she was like, well, my experience is that people with eating disorders are liars.
Non-compliant.
And I don't believe you. And I was just like, whoa, okay, fantastic. I now feel safe with you. Like, and I can come to you and talk to you about my feelings and things. And I was completely shocked and floored by that. And when I said to her, I'm not lying, I'm telling you the truth, I'm doing all of these things because I want to get better, I want to make improvements. And she's sitting there and she's going, well, I've been researching eating disorders for 20 years. And even though I don't have one, I think I know a lot more about eating disorders than you. And I just floored and shocked by the experience. I'm like, you're meant to be leading this unit, and this is what you're saying to me. This is wild. And then another nurse that I really connected with, who was lovely, and I did really, like, she was fantastic at what she did, but still a foreign concept, even within an eating disorder unit, that you could be a cis male, straight male with an eating disorder, which was really interesting. Because one of the things that she did, she was like, hey, I think you'll really like this book. I think this book's going to resonate with you a lot, like, to help you through the eating disorder. And I was like, okay. And I started reading it. And it's a whole story about a closeted homosexual male.
Oh my God.
And I'm like,
what are you implying?
What do you mean? Like, you're now questioning my sexual identity simply because I have an eating disorder. And again, it reinforced that I couldn't be a cis white straight male with an eating disorder. I had to either be a female, or I had to identify as something different, or I had to be a homosexual in order to have an eating disorder. And I was like, this is such a bizarre experience. So it really affected me there, because growing up in a country town, especially, like, masculinity was like how you evaluated your self-worth on. And I already have been told that I have something that makes me inherently masculine, right? Like, this isn't something that a man could have. And then I'm being told, okay, well, you are a man, you have it, but now that must mean therefore you're gay.
Can I just say, like, and I don't, can I just say, like, fuck the patriarchy? Because as you're saying that, I'm just like, God forbid, there has to be, because you have an eating disorder, there has to be a feminine component to it, because it couldn't possibly
weird,
be
right?
a man that has, this thing. Like, oh
Bizarre.
my God, it's just.
And I'm only just sort of cluing into it and just starting to peel back a lot of those layers. Like, my partner Jem, she's just been arguably the strongest force in my life for helping me overcome a lot of these, pre-programmed ideas that I had in my brain, and these twisted ideas around masculinity that I've had. And that's taken a long time, and it is really difficult, because it is really bred in. Even though I grew up in a really feminist, pro-feminist household with really strong female figures, the surrounding environment had far more influence and power over what I thought a man was and what I thought a man could be. And so I just lived in pure denial, even when I got through my stay at the clinic and refed and gained all this weight. Like, it's just like, you basically, how would I describe it? I feel like, honestly, because restricting food was my drug, I felt like I went to rehab, right? And I detoxed, and I was in this very controlled environment. And then as soon as I left that controlled environment, was back into my old environment with the same triggers and behaviors around, I just fell immediately back into the old patterns of thinking.
You didn't recover just because you went into a facility?
Right. The only way that I could continue receiving support was to do the day program, which was in Sydney, and we couldn't afford it. We couldn't afford to put me up somewhere in Sydney. I'm already seeing my parents, like, under financial stress, and I'm freaking out, and I'm like, I can't do this. This isn't
and then,
fair on them.
Also the component of your parents then having to travel 5 hours to see their son, like,
see me,
or
right?
Ripping themselves out of their work environment and home environment, staying there. Like, it's just,
And I mean, even if you were able to do the day program in Sydney, you're still not, well, first of all, you need to be able to afford to, stay in Sydney and access all your community care in Sydney.
And live by yourself.
Living by yourself.
16-year-old.
And it's also, you're still not in your everyday life. And so eventually, if you recovered in Sydney, quote unquote, air quotes, like with this day program, you're then still having to go back home to the life that you sort of grew up in. Those triggers aren't going away. You've learned how to recover in a specific environment, and then you're putting yourself back into an old one. Those are still going to be there.
Quite a medicalized environment, right? Like,
very much so.
It was an awful experience for a number of years of my life. So I obviously was missing. I was out of school, and then that brought its own judgments and fear along with it, because I was like, I'm a failure because I'm not sitting my HSC and I'm out, and so I can't be loved. And now my body's changing rapidly because I'm having to put on weight in a very quick period of time to save my life. But, I'm having to do that right now. So I was getting really scared and really frightened about all of that. So I just had this complete identity crisis, and all I wanted to do was go back to losing weight, because that's when I felt strong and powerful. And so refeeding me is what they termed it, refeeding me, ultimately just gave me the energy and the motivation to then go back to the way I was when I got back to Dubbo, right? So it was just this vicious cycle. And I was told by the people on the ward that I was in, who told me this is was really painful to even contemplate and think about right now. But in one of the group therapy sessions, I'm sitting there really diligently because I want to do the work. I want to get better. I didn't like the way that I was. I didn't like feeling the way I did, and I wanted to get better. I wanted to improve. And she said, nobody, you won't recover from an eating disorder. It'll be something that you'll have forever. And I just went, what the fuck? And I remember I said to her, I was like, no, I'm going to recover from this, and this is going to be my only admission. And she's like, you'll be back. And I just remember feeling so betrayed and so angry and so upset. I'm like, why am I here then? Why am I here?
Yeah, why
am I here
if
I'm just going to exist?
Because on the other side, they're saying, oh, well, if you're losing weight, you're non-compliant, even though you're doing everything right. So even when you do everything right, you're not compliant.
Still never going to recover.
Still not doing it right.
I'm still never going to recover. That's what she said. I'm like, if this is the people who know the most, right, quote unquote, the most about eating disorders, who told me, they've written books about eating disorders and they understand what it's like. They're telling me I'm never going to recover. Why don't I just kill myself right now? Like I felt like that. I felt I didn't want to go on anymore because there was no hope for recovery.
You can't live a life like that, right? Like that's just thinking about that is just poor.
Exactly. But thankfully at the time I'd had enough. My brain was starting to come back online from the refeeding process, and I was starting to get the nutrients, and I was starting to think clearer, because when you are starved, you just can't think. You're just reactive. You're reactive to everything. You're emotional about everything. But when you start eating again and you start getting the nourishment, your body starts to wake up again and go, whoa, where the hell have we been?
Brain gets some fuel to actually function. Yeah.
And so when they said that, fortunately, my reaction was like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Good on
you. And also,
going to come back from this.
I'm going to prove you wrong.
I'm going to prove you wrong.
Yeah,
you can get stuffed, mate. Like, well, I honestly, it was from the support around me as well. But I just remember that. I remember that being a distinct turning point for me, being like, fuck the stereotype. Fuck what this all looks like. You're telling me I can't recover. I'm just going to give this red hot go. Like, I've got nothing to lose right now. But I will admit that was also paired with that wasn't an unwavering, because I know some people, especially if they're hearing my story right now and they are affected with an eating disorder, they'll think, oh, I've got to have this mentality forever, all the time, unbroken. No, it wasn't like that, okay? This is the difficulty with binary thinking, right? There are shit days, there are good days, there are shit days, there are good days. And at the start, there's far more shit days than there are good days. And there were periods of time even beyond that point where I thought, I'm going to beat this.
Yeah.
That I was at home and I was like, I'm never seeing the light. I cannot see the light. For the life of me, I could not picture recovering. I couldn't imagine what that would feel like, what that would seem like, what that would smell like. Like, it just seemed so foreign a concept to me. There were periods of that as well. So there was this big sway in emotions, which is obviously what you also have when you start restricting again. But a huge turning point for me, and again, which is probably one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast, because I've never really had an in-depth public discussion about what my experiences were one-on-one. Like, I've done definitely media appearances and things like that, but it's more about the cause as opposed to my individual experiences alone. So it's, it is quite difficult, but there was this massive turning point for me when I was watching an Australian Story and David Pocock was on there. And at the time, David Pocock was my hero. Like, I was a rugby player. He was the best rugby player at the time. I just wanted to be like him. I thought he was incredible. I thought he was amazing. And God, call it the universe giving you a slap across the face. He was doing this Australian Story, and he never said eating disorder, and that's fine. But he articulated how he had a lot of body image issues.
Amazing.
He had a lot of struggles around food intake and safe foods and scary foods, and trying to lose weight, and that he ultimately felt like he was being really selfish and that his family were being affected, but he couldn't help it. And I just went, wow, if this picture of masculinity, this is my internal dialogue at the time, right? An elite rugby union player who is jacked and blah, 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 like all of the stereotypical hallmarks of a man,
and worshipped and so talented,
and
right?
who had this illness and he got through it and he became a professional rugby player, then I can do it. He was the first man that I ever encountered that had similar behaviors, similar thoughts to me. And he he had a wife, and he had his, he had a very similar family to me, and he loved his rugby, and he loved his sport, and he was passionate about things. And
I'm trying not to cry.
I know, right?
Yeah, I was sitting there and I was like, this is finally, like, I've got somebody that I can, I had to see somebody who was affected by it and could get through it to really feel like I could do the same thing. And it's ultimately why I'm really passionate about talking about it. I've never openly talked about why I do this sort of stuff and why I talk about it, is because that was a massive turning point for me. And I would have done fucking anything at any stage of my eating disorder to see another man similar to me, affected by the same things that I was going through, who said, you know what, it really feels like you're never going to recover. It fucking truly feels like that, but you can, and you will, as long as you don't give up and you keep trying, right? Like, and that was like, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it now. It just really changed everything for me.
Oh, I'm actually trying not to cry because, like, honestly, it's just such a powerful and like rings true thing, is sharing your experience if you can. Like, there's a lot of people that you don't need to, but like shared experiences, hearing you represented in somebody else is so powerful.
And I think that's, one of the reasons I exactly wanted you on our podcast is because I've had people who know that we do this podcast, and they've asked me, have you ever thought about having a man's perspective? I'm like, absolutely.
It's coming.
It's coming. Like, don't worry, because it is so, like, people need to see themselves in these stories to know that, because eating disorders alone are super isolating, and it makes you feel like so alone, and no one's going to understand what you're going through, and
you're defective, and you're the only person that's going through it, and
exactly,
you're completely different to everybody else who has an eating disorder. And it's so nice to hear, I guess, for our listeners and anybody who is listening that who might identify as a man, as a male, that there are others that are going. It's actually, I say this to my clients all the time. Do you know what? Your eating disorder is actually really boring. It is not different. Like, honestly, it is. It is not different to anybody else's. Yes, there's different components to it. Yes, there's different, under, like, what's beneath it. Yes, there's different traumas, etc. Yes, absolutely. But at the end of the day, your eating disorder is boring, and we need to hear that.
I wanted to hear that. I wanted to hear that desperately. I wanted to hear that I wasn't this other thing sitting in the corner that was completely different to anybody else, and that I was going to be alone in this battle. Like, I really wanted somebody that I could view as a role model, or not even necessarily as a role model, but view somebody with similar perspectives that looked like me, sounded like me, like the same things as me. Like, it sounds so shallow, but it's so important. It's so important.
It's not shallow at all. It's so important.
Yeah.
And that's why I guess I'm passionate about this and want to do it, because I'm just hoping that it touches somebody out there, a man who might be feeling the exact same things. And I hope to God, because
it kind of makes it all worth it in a way if you can help that one person.
Yeah, like, I know the stats are showing that the majority of eating disorders is affected by women, but I just think that's so skewed, because so few.
We don't have accurate stats.
Yeah, so few. Like, I've met a lot of men who have suffered from eating disorders, and it breaks my heart because they don't know what's wrong with them.
If you walked into a gym, I think you could probably meet at least 20. Minimum.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard. I see it at the gym. I see it really. It's really difficult, and like, the gym's only been something that I've recently been able to have a nice relationship with. Right, like, it's so easy to get obsessive about this stuff. And it's only been in the recent years, really, that I've started unpacking that, hey, I'm good enough as I am. And that's such a hard thing to come to terms with. And I still have my days with it. Like, it's night and day to where I was, absolutely. But it was so difficult to come to terms with acknowledging that I have inherent worth and I'm inherently valuable.
Yeah. And I belong there. If I want to go, I belong. Like, I don't have to look a certain way to be able to do this. Yeah.
Exactly.
Even this body acceptance thing, I think, as Callie has messaged me, we've been chatting a little bit this week about how you don't even need to love your body, because I think oftentimes that can be still such a lofty goal for so many people. You don't even have to
100%.
You don't even have to like it. You just have to accept that it is.
Just have to accept it.
And
you can still look after it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I completely agree with that, because it took me a very long time to even have respect for my body, let alone learn to love it. And I'm still battling with that, just like anybody else. But the thing is, I'm battling with that the same amount as anybody else would be battling with that, not particularly, any more or less. A strong step in that direction for me was actually to start unpacking the shame that I had from that young boy who did nothing to deserve what he got from those around him that were supposed to love him and accept him. So I had this little picture of myself, because it was a distinctive time in my life where I had a massive amount of shame, and I put that picture on my mirror there, and every morning I would look at that picture of that young boy and I'd go, like, say the things that I wish someone fucking said to me at that age, right? Like, yeah, that you are more than a fucking enough, mate. Like, you deserve love. You don't have to do anything, right? You don't need to go out there and chase achievements. You don't need to be this quote unquote, average success in a Western culture, which is lots of money and big status and cars and blah, blah, blah. Like, you are exactly enough as you are. And you can find your own path and figure out what you want to do with your life. Like, if only I could go back to myself and talk to myself like that, it would have just been a pivotal moment for me. And so that was a really useful tool for me to start unpacking a lot of that unnecessary shame that I had that was preventing me from moving forward in my journey and being able to accept myself and go, you know what, this is okay. My experience is my experience. I can move forward from this, But I'm just hoping, that's one strategy that actually really worked for me.
Can I ask with that, because I think a lot of people listening, and I think it's a bit of a, like, for some people it can be a collective experience of that, you spoke about how you got that love and validation and care when you did look a particular way and when you did particular things, that's when you got that. How did you, and you sort of touched on it then with, unpacking that shame and, speaking to that little boy in the photo you've got on your mirror. How did you ultimately, and I don't know if you can answer this, but how did you ultimately, I guess, though, like, disconnect those two things? As in, for my entire life, that's when I've gotten care, that's when I've gotten love. How did you kind of disconnect that to be like, I can have love as I am now, or, because I always say this to my clients as well, is that, like, well, actually the love and care that you're receiving then isn't actually true love and care, but the love and care you can receive on the other side is proper connection. It's proper love. It's proper care, because it's not just people being worried about you or people, showing care in the way of like, oh my gosh, are you going to have to go to hospital again? Or are you okay? Or are you eating?
That's a great point.
Yeah. How did you were you able to unpack that and come to a place where those two things were disconnected?
It's a multifaceted question. I'm really glad you touched on it, because it did feel like that for a long time when I was unwell, is that I needed to stay unwell because that was when people were showing affection and care. And I felt like that's the only way that I could then get love, is by being unwell, which is obviously a really dark and horrible place to be.
But it's understandable.
Yeah. And I just wanted somebody to go, give me the template, give me the again, structured, regimented, black and white thinking, give me the template, the steps that I need to take in order to fix this, which there isn't. It's a bit of a squirrely process, but
it is, yes.
the answer, the profound answer that I've had to come to terms with myself is step one's always just awareness. So just going, am I, like, right now I'm feeling an intense amount of emotions. What place is this coming from? What's a memory that comes to mind when I think about this? And then, starting to just become ultimately aware of what has caused this emotion and coming up. And every time I touch that emotion and I become aware of it, it loses a little bit of its power every time. So when I'm sitting there at home and I'm stressing at work because I feel like I fucked up and I've sent the wrong email and this person's going to be really unhappy. Whoa, okay, stop. Awareness. Does it warrant this emotional reaction? No. Where's this coming from? Right? And so the next time when I make that mistake, it's not as much of an emotional reaction, just because I'm constantly coming back and I'm touching it and I'm just recognizing it, touching it and going, labeling it. No, that's coming from this place. That's coming from this place. That's coming from this place. Some days, I get really caught up and it might take me a couple of days to be able to unpack that. But a lot of the time now I'm at the point where it's tens of minutes of dealing with it as opposed to weeks and months, because I can go, this is the place that it's coming from. As soon as I become aware of it, it's really bizarre. It just sort of fades away. Like one powerful strategy for me is when I'm really, really anxious, I go, okay, sweet. I'm going to set a timer for later on this afternoon because I can't focus on it right now. I'm going to set a timer for this afternoon for 5 minutes to freak the fuck out. Like, I'll literally write that in my calendar. Freak the fuck out at 5 p.m. today. Sweet. It's in my calendar. I'm not going to forget that. That's great. 5 o'clock comes along, right? And I go, time to freak out. And I click it and I'm like, freak out. Let's do it. Let's do it. Go mine, freak out. And nothing comes up. Nothing comes up because I'm allowing it to be there. It's in the fighting of those thoughts that causes them to become all the more stronger. I'm trying to flat rough seas with a paddle, right? You only make them greater.
I love that saying. That's so good.
So do I. Ash, you're going to roll my eyes at you're going to roll your eyes at me, but a bit of a classic DBT skill you've got going on there.
Yeah,
I'm a DBT
there's
fan.
a lot of different. Yeah, the one that I found really helpful for me was it's escaping me. That's going to make me really sad. Psychodynamic therapy.
Oh, okay. Yep.
I found that really helpful for me, and like identifying schemas as well, like partially schema therapy, just to help with those labels, because
helps
the
you understand.
Answer is become aware. You don't need to do anything against it. You just need to become aware. And every time you become aware, you take a little bit of its power. Some days it comes back really strong and it might feel bigger than last time, but every time on all, the aggregation of it is a decline in how that affects you and how that makes, but the difficulty around that as well is when you're starting to get, well, that's good. But when you have traumatic events, which you will ultimately in your lifetime, or you'll have bumpy periods, and I've had a couple of really traumatic experiences post-eating disorder, which has thrown me back down again, which is really difficult. But what I found is that the path back is generally a lot faster. It's like muscle memory.
I agree, yeah. And I think, I talk to Ash a lot about that as well, is really that's kind of recovery maintenance.
Yeah, exactly.
Being aware of those things and, you are a human, so really hard things are going to happen to you in life, but being really aware of that and knowing what skills you can turn to when these big things do happen, so it isn't just a huge crash down back to an eating disorder, because that's the skill I've always used to cope. It's like having all of these things in your toolbox to be like, cool, I'm going to do all of this stuff first because I know that's going to be more helpful. And like you explained it perfectly, like, recognizing like it's actually allowed to be there. Those thoughts and feelings and everything are allowed to be there because you're a human. Just because you've been through an eating disorder doesn't mean you're invincible. Everybody has thoughts and feelings and they're allowed to be there. We don't have to give it the power that, is going to be the thing that is destructive.
And also not beating yourself up for those thoughts existing, right?
You're a human.
Yeah. I was chatting to a friend of mine who, I'm not going to divulge any personal information, but she was having a really tough day and she's had a history with this kind of stuff. And she was just getting really frustrated that it was coming back up again. It's like, it's allowed to come back. It's, and it's so much harder to unlearn things than it is to learn things. And those things, once you have those things in your brain, oftentimes they don't go away. And exactly what you were talking about, Callie, recovery maintenance, it is totally okay. And things are going to come up. And it's, by going through the process of recovery, especially, in community care, which is where a large portion of the stuff you learn, it's, once you have those tools, then you can deploy them. And now that once you've got them in your sort of arsenal, you can whip them out when things come up. And it's like, it's arrogant to think that this thing won't ever affect you ever again. And I'm not giving that nurse any sort of space to that, said that really horrible stuff to you. Like, oh, you'll never recover from this. That's like, you will recover, but things won't always disappear. And it's adjusting expectations, right? Of saying those things.
The only way to make it disappear is to fully forget it. And if you forget it, you lose a part of yourself, right? So it's not about necessarily overcoming it to the extent that it doesn't exist anymore, because it just makes you susceptible in the future to the exact same thing. What you want to do is you get to a point where you manage it so well that it doesn't affect your daily life. So.
And I think that's exactly kind of why we call this podcast this, right? It's, we're not broken. We're not, we've mended these things that might be cracked, or, things that we don't want to hide away from the things that make us who we are. And we want to actually highlight them, and we're stronger because of them. So
exactly.
That's exactly.
I like the name Paved with Gold, because it's like such an awesome, what is it, Japanese tradition or something? You break a bowl, you heal it with gold, right? But or the Japanese cabinet makers and things, if they had built a cabinet or a table perfectly, they would always put a notch in it so it would give it some character. Like, these are the things that make you. These are the parts that allow you to connect with a broader range of humanity. I think it does make you more of a well-rounded individual. And I think just to put a bit of an insight into potentially how you get there in a lot of ways is that when you're in the midst of an eating disorder, you are very often, the tendency is to be quite extreme. You pick up on extremes, the black and white. And what I found through going through an eating disorder is that I've become less extreme. I've become less impulsive. I still am, definitely. It's part of my personality, right? I tend to get really passionate about things and dive into it, but the roller coaster of emotions aren't as extreme now, which is good. That's how I want to be. I feel more stable, because for so many years I felt so unstable. I felt any little gust of wind would knock me over. And now I feel like I've got good, strong foundations. I still have thoughts on occasion. I still have difficulties in my day-to-day, but it's not going to rock my day. It's not going to rock my week. It's not going to rock my month. I'm able to push through it and just recognize, label it, move on. Yeah.
I love that so much. Can I just ask, and I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but what are some of the things you would like to see change in eating disorder treatment when it comes to men?
Yeah, just to dovetail off of that, and I know that this came up in our episode with Nick McDermott, it's like often we're aware of some of the shortcomings of treatment for eating disorders and things that are lacking. And I don't want it to come across like we shit on that kind of treatment at all. Because let's be honest, the treatment that we've all had allowed us to recover in the end, and it is life-saving treatment. Although I think it absolutely needs to be individualized, absolutely needs to be customized to the specific person, and it needs to be flexible based on people's needs, whether they're neurodivergent, whether they're, in marginalized bodies, and all of those kind of things. But at the same time, we absolutely encourage, and we always say, go get help immediately, because sometimes you can't overcome this by yourself, and more often than not, you can't. But at the same time, we also recognize that a lot of things, particularly inpatient treatment, needs to change. And what are some of the things that you'd like to see changed, given that, from the male perspective, for anyone else who comes after you?
Yeah. There's a few ways I can take it, because obviously it's been a number of years since I've had inpatient treatment and even outpatient treatment. So I don't know what changes have been implemented since then, because I'm not part of that. I'm not in that space at the moment. But I'll tackle it through. Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I'll take it from two approaches. The first one is just straight up acknowledgement that it does affect every demographic. For me personally, I just wanted to know that there are other men out there who were like me that were affected by it. Honestly, that did more for me than any amount of inpatient treatment, right? Just the acknowledgement that somebody similar to me, that's so powerful and such an easy thing to do, right? If somebody sees this podcast and they share it with somebody else who's potentially affected with an eating disorder, that potentially might, really get them down the pathway of getting help and getting support and getting through it, because they can see that somebody else has done the same thing, right? So for me, it just would have been awareness there. Single biggest thing that could have been done, most impactful action, and it's super easy to do. The second portion of it, I guess, which is a little bit more nuanced when you go into the inpatient unit, I found it really interesting going through it, because I didn't feel like we were ever educated around what a healthy relationship with food is and how to make it sustainable for when you go home. You were just sort of given these standard diet plans and meals and things that weren't similar to regular everyday diet for a healthy individual. They were just in themselves, I felt like they were quite extreme. So being able to teach people how to, once they leave this facility, how to be able to carry on, how to make sure that they adhere to their meals, and that they're these easy things that they can make when they're at home. Because if you put any sort of barriers into it, it's so easy to just go, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to skip it altogether. Or no, I'm going to indulge further when I go out. So there was no real customizability to the diet plans, other than how many additional meals do you need to eat in order to get to this magic number. Well, when I sat with the dietitian was fantastic, right? The meeting went like this: your weight's this, we need to see increase, therefore add this thing in, right? Like, I didn't find that overly helpful. And that's just because they didn't have enough resources. If I had a longer time with that individual, I reckon we could have really articulated like education around food, around what's the relationship with food, how do I adhere to meals, what's a well-rounded balanced meal, what is a well-rounded balanced meal, what does that look like, how do I make that easy for myself at home. It was just these extremes in there.
What's the science behind it as well, right?
It's the
Like, I
science
know
behind
for
there.
so
Like,
many, like, you need that because it's like, no, well, but I don't understand why I have to eat this. Well, this is why. Let's go into it and actually teach you. I'm not like, you're not stupid just because you have an eating disorder. You're actually highly intelligent. So you're able to take this stuff on and like, you know.
And being able to make informed decisions as well. And, you know, just as well as that, you know, how other cultures play into it, you know. So I always use this, you know, this thought of, you know, oh, say an Indian meal might be seen as like, oh, an indulgence. It's like, well, what if that's your everyday meal?
Or like a food challenge, and it's actually, well, that's something I eat every single day.
Yeah,
I have really good Indian friends, and they like that's their meal, like that's what they have day in day out. You know, different versions, and it's incredible. I love it when she cooks for me, but that's it. There's no cultural allowance to it.
No cultural allowance, no flexibility. And when you're in there, they go, oh, we need to make you less afraid of your quote unquote scare, like fear foods, right? So we're going to hyper focus on it and we're going to bombard you with them. We're going to give you them every day, multiple times a day, which is not a sustainable way of living when you leave that facility, right? That's not ultimately a healthy way. Like, it's important to be able to refeed yourself and get up there and address some of your fear foods, but in a safe environment, not this sort of like fear environment. If you don't eat this, then you're going to get punished. That's what it was. It was, if you don't eat this thing, we're going to sit you upstairs and we're going to give you this dense drink that you have to sit there and you have to drink and you have to finish it.
So they actually have now, and I don't mean to trash on, because I think I am very much, you know, of the opinion that inpatient very much has its place. I think people think it has its place a little bit too much, but I do believe it has its place and it can be helpful. However, it can be wildly unhelpful. It's very, like, you've depicted it entirely well. Like, you know, now we have our red flag systems within inpatient of, you know, if you rely on fortisips at a mealtime too many times, then you get a red flag, and on your third red flag, you're actually kicked out, and you're kicked out with zero resources, which is just horrifying to me and just like honestly unbelievable. And, you know, then we take into the fact of, the punishment, but also like the lack of neuroaffirming care within there. Like, you know, you must stick to the schedule. Like, I have ADHD. My eating schedule is bloody chaotic. Like, it's, you know, all over the place because that's what works for me, and it leaves no room for that. And as somebody with ADHD in that environment, learning that's the way you need to eat, and then coming out and being like, well, that's really unsustainable for me. That doesn't fit into my life because like I need to eat 1,000 things within like this period of time, because then I'm going to be really busy during this period of time. And like, it's just not reality.
Yeah, I feel like the goal should always be to get to the point of intuitive eating, being able to welcome back your cues and then being able to understand how to listen to those cues. Because ultimately, because I didn't have the support when I left, like I had to develop that on my own over a series of years, and I just adhered to a really rigorous structure. Like when I met my girlfriend Jem for the first time, like I would class myself as orthorexic at the time, because I adhered to this really regimented structure where I couldn't deviate from it, and it was just the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Doesn't allow for spontaneity, does it?
None at all. Even on our first date, right? When we went out to our first date, I was terrified of going out for dinner, right? I remember having real difficulty with that. But over the course of our relationship, you know, and because I've done a lot of hard work on myself and she's been a great support there, being able to listen to my cues, know when I'm hungry, know what I want, and be able to have variety in my day-to-day. And, you know, it's actually in the variety, not in the structure, that has allowed me to recover, because the structure, I just found safety in the structure, and then I would have to keep that structure. And if anything changed, I would panic and I would get anxiety and I would freak out. But now, like, I don't know what I'm going to eat for dinner for this entire week. And then what I do is I take whatever that dinner was and then we make a little bit extra and I've got it for lunch the next day. So there's constant variety. And I know if I break that variety and I approach, you know, like, you know, Jim Bro science of eat chicken and potato and things, if I do that for a week, I will really struggle to break that, you know, because it would have felt safe.
So awareness again, right?
So it's
Recovery
the awareness,
maintenance.
and that should be the goal. That should be the goal: is awareness and intuitive eating and variety, and not being afraid of variety. And structure and punishment is not the way. It's very much treated like an addiction in a lot of ways. It's like you have the power to change this immediately, and if you, yeah, three strikes. If you're found using your behaviors again, then we're going to kick you out, and you got no resources. Good luck.
Rather than these behaviors are maladaptive, what are they actually
Yeah.
serving?
Yeah, it really highlights the importance of community care and finding a team that works for you and your own individual needs, especially, and if possible, finding someone with a lived experience who can help work with you.
That's it.
What is some advice that you would give to any men or boys out there who may be experiencing disordered eating or an eating disorder, in particular accessing care as a male? I know we've sort of touched on it, but if we can sort of get the clear soundbite so that people can just come back to this, what would be that advice?
The overwhelming sense is that you're not alone. You're not the only person in the world. It doesn't discriminate across any demographic. It can affect anybody, and you're not alone. I completely empathize with your position and understand what it feels like. And I know that reaching out for help is really, really difficult, but it's so crucially important. There is a life to be lived out there. You can recover. It feels dark right now, and I know what that feeling is like, that it feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But I promise you, once you get out there and you start experimenting with ways and methods of getting better, that light becomes so bright, and then you see the ultimate possibilities. You've got nothing to lose in doing that. You've got zero to lose.
I love that. Why don't you just see what's on the other side? If you hate it so much, you can always go back.
Flip the coin, give it a go.
Yeah, I've never met anybody who gets to the other side and wants to go back, but you have that option.
Neither have I. I'm still yet to meet somebody who's like, I wish I could go back. Every resounding person I've talked to has said, I never thought I could do it, never thought I could get through it. Now that I have, holy shit. Like all the things that I could have missed out on, And it doesn't matter. I've heard that from people who are 70 and have recently recovered, and I've heard that from people who are 15, 16, 17. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at the time.
Well, one thing I always used to say is, as soon as I gave up my eating disorder, I got everything my eating disorder promised me. So,
Great point.
to end, what did giving up your eating disorder give you in return? What does your life look like now? What makes you happy?
It gave me back me, gave me back my life, gave me back everything that I wish I could have had. Exactly like you mentioned, right? Everything that the eating disorder promised me is what I have now. And everything that it promised me, if I'd adhered to what he was telling me to do, I never would have had that. I've now got a vibrant social life that I didn't think I'd ever get back. I've got a job that I love. I work with people that I love. I'm doing things that I love, and I'm starting to explore. Like, I'm a naturally very curious person, and now I've got the energy, the capacity, and the reserves to be able to go out and explore the world, which is something that I've always been wanting to do. And I've awoken that curiosity. And for me, that is the most valuable thing of recovering from an eating disorder for me. It just gave me back my wonder for the world. And it would have been really sad for me to have missed out on that.
Oh, don't make me cry again.
I don't mean to be bringing out too many big feelings, but like, yeah, I wasn't sure with how I'd be able to get through this, actually, because I've never really talked about my story in depth before with people. And I know, because I've got a bit of an ADHD brain as well, I do a lot of jumping around and on the different topics. But as a first experience of being able to tell my story in this sort of format, I hope it was beneficial. I hope some people get some things out of it. And I had no reason to be anxious. I was very anxious, I must admit.
It was perfect. Well, no,
We feel so honored that you came on and actually shared everything in its entirety. We like, it's vulnerability, and we love that, and that's where we grow.
yeah, and we always know that like it has just been like such an insightful and incredible, and I feel like we have some every single one of our guests have just been incredible, and I feel like it's happened to so many of them. Hey Ash, is that I think we looked at the questions once.
Yeah, pretty much.
It can just be a conversation.
The natural form, like practicing what we preach about rather than the regimented nature and fixed format, allowing it to be whatever it is in a space that allows for that. Yeah, I was anxious at the start to talk about, because I didn't know how it would flow and how things would come out, but I'm really glad I did it, and that I was able to share at least part of my story with you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic that you're bringing a platform to it. I've always thought about how good it would be. And then it's so wonderful to see two passionate individuals create it and sort of distribute stories out there, because that's as I mentioned, what's the biggest thing that you can do is just bring awareness to it. And that's exactly what you're doing.
Your voice is powerful, and it's, I think, so many times, and you've mentioned this before, Callie, is when we're in our eating disorders, we often lose our voice and we forget that we have it, and we forget to advocate for ourselves. But using your voice is so powerful. Make some noise, share your story, reach out for help. Your voice is so much more powerful than you think. It's like we said at the start, this one stereotypical image of eating disorders only damages everybody who lives with them, and there's no one way that it looks. So another reason why I wanted you on this podcast to share your story.
Eating disorders are diverse, and so should treatment be.
Yeah, exactly right. And a struggle shared is a struggle halved, right? Yeah. So it's awesome.
Well, that's all for today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks, Liam, once again for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And if you'd love to leave us a little rating or review on your platform of choice, that really helps us out. You can follow us on Instagram at pavedwithgoldpod, send us a Gmail at pavedwithgoldpod@gmail.com, or visit our website, pavedwithgoldpodcast.com. All of those links will be in the show notes, along with extra resources as usual. Until next time, stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is general in nature and has not taken your personal circumstances or medical history into account. We are here to share our own experiences and the things that we have found helpful throughout our own personal recovery journeys. Please remember that each person's journey and circumstances are different, and not all of the information contained in this podcast may be relatable to you. It's important you consult your own GP or recovery team to seek out tailored advice before making any important decisions relating to your own health and recovery process. If you have found any of the content in this episode distressing, please contact your care team or a medical professional. If you or someone you know is in crisis and needs help now, please contact emergency services in your region immediately.